Lord of Mysteries Fire of Destruction Chapter 401 to 403. After the gathering ended, the next step was simple. The same movement would be repeated, and each group would take different carriages to meet the rest at Warehouse 7. A little while later, Ardelia District, Ardirose Street. Placing the container on his lap, the redhead looked amusedly at the detective in the opposite chair in front of him. Marich and Sharon left as soon as they delivered his order, the latter saying that she would send the book on making talismans by messenger. So now there were only 3 people in the room: Klein, Flora, and Adrian. The white-haired woman stood a few steps behind the red-haired man, her gaze focused on the detective, who wished it were not so. After the event in the carriage, he didn't think he could look her in the eye without remembering what Madame Sharon had implied. "Well, you haven't forgotten what we promised, have you?" With his lips slightly raised, Adrian tilted his head to one side. Not wanting to make this any longer than it needed to be and ignoring the pain in his chest at saying goodbye to his beloved so soon, Klein slid the money he had prepared onto the table. Adrian grabbed the bills, and after looking at the wad in his hand for 2 seconds, he carelessly tucked it into a pocket of his tunic. "A pleasure doing business with you, detective." Laughing, he placed the container on the table and threw it with little force. It slid for a few moments before being caught by the hand of a Klein, who had his lips slightly pursed. "Rich people are the worst. If they had given me that amount of money, I would have counted it 10 times to make sure it was all there. I wouldn't just put it in my pocket." The pang in his heart grew more intense as Klein ignored his emotions and opened the container, breaking the seal of spirituality. Inside the container and resting on a handkerchief was a heart-shaped, brown, palm-sized root, wrinkled in appearance, resembling an old man's skin. It exhibits slight expansion and contraction, suggesting a degree of vitality. Seeing this curious object, Klein took out a coin and, repeating 7 times in his mind, threw it into the air. Opening his hands to catch the coin, the clown watched emotionlessly as it slipped through his fingers and hit the floor, rolling to the other side of the room. Quote. The detective wanted to be swallowed by the earth. Peef. Flora almost broke down but managed to keep her composure. Her eyes now had a mischievous gleam. "Seriously, did you really think that was going to work?" her eyes said. Feeling that the detective was about to explode thanks to his sense as a provoker, Adrian held out his hand and, with his threads, made the coin fly into his palm. "You don't have to worry. It's the real deal." As he said this, he threw the coin to the clown, who caught it with a bored look on his face. "Thank you, sir." Completely ignoring the woman, Klein got up from his seat. "I guess that's the end of our deal." That's it." Nodding, Adrian smiled knowingly at the man. "Next time we meet, I hope you show me a good trick, Mr. Magician." If the man was surprised that he already knew he was preparing for his promotion, Klein showed no reaction. He just smiled mysteriously and gave a slight nod. "I'll be sure to prepare a special one just for you, Mr. Kenway." Oh, not having expected such a response, the smile on his face grew until he showed his teeth. "Then I'll look forward to it, detective." "And you shall." Closing his eyes, the man placed a hand on his chest and bowed gallantly. With that same grace and nothing more to say, the clown left the room and the warehouse with his head held a little higher. Flora watched as the detective left, her smile gone and a slight frown on her face. "I don't like him. Do you even like anyone? I tolerate you, and that's enough for me." As he looked sideways at his colleague, Adrian took a transparent vial from his tunic. Holding it up slightly, he looked at it with a critical eye. 2 fangs, 8 centimeters long and metallic black, were inside this vial. Despite being in the vial, their danger could be felt. It was as if they were still in their owner, ready to destroy and tear apart everything and anyone in their path. These were the fangs of the forest hunter, the last ingredient he needed for his Reaper's potion. "I bet they taste good. They look like hard candy." Shaking his head, the redhead just sighed at the foolish thought and shook the vial a couple of times, watching as the contact between the fangs generated sparks, and he put it back in his tunic. He took out 2 more vials, one containing a short, almost invisible crimson thread and the other a few black hairs. Looking sideways at his companion, Adrian mischievously shook the vials. "I'm going to do a divination. Would you like to see it with me? It's not like I have anything better to do." Rolling her shoulders, Flora grabbed the opposite chair and pulled it over to his side, leaving a pace and a half of distance. For his part, the redhead took from his tunic a simple silver mirror as big as his head. Ever since he dominated mirror divination, he always carried one with him. Calmly, he used his threads and cut off the tip of his left index finger. With the crimson liquid that fell, he began to write multiple sentences and symbols on the edges of the mirror. Blood, especially human blood, is one of the most important ingredients in mirror divination. There is no better ingredient than that. Everything could be missing, but never the blood. If one did not use blood for mirror divination, they were already doing it wrong. The result could include information that either did not help or could even mislead, giving false information and causing one to end up in dangerous and deadly situations. What he could take from the vampire was little. Not wanting to risk alerting the man, Adrian had only taken enough to discover his identity and track him down, so he would have to use his own. And even then, the blood he had was very little. For a Beander with no abilities related to Mirror World, what the conspirator did was a waste of time and a risk he took in vain. Only the sequence 6 Witches of Pleasure could make use of this little blood and use it for their divinations and curses. If he relied on his own spirituality, mirror divination would undoubtedly fail and could even bring enormous risks. But why would he do that? Although witches could rely on their own powers to obtain results through mirror divination, they preferred to use the primordial demoness to perform them. Not only because of their belief in the castrated bitch, but also because the results would be better. After all, how could they call themselves witches if they didn't contact evil and cruel deities? Adrian's case was the same. Why rely on himself when he had a god to turn to? So, with his blood, he finished the first row in the mirror and quickly filled in the second, this time writing his honorific name as the Scarlet Monarch. Finally, to bring the process to an end, Adrian quickly and skillfully drew the symbol. A spear wrapped by infinity at the foot of which there was an open book. As soon as the symbol was finished, the blood surrounding the surface of the mirror wept and began to concentrate in the center of the mirror. A crimson whirlpool was quickly formed whose dark center seemed to be a portal to the unknown. Already accustomed to such a vision, Adrian grabbed one of the black hairs and threw it into the whirlpool. Immediately, it calmed down and stabilized, and the crimson red of the blood quickly changed to an illusory and turbulent yellow. Within that illusory yellow, a scene began to form. The duo watched as the first thing to appear was a tender face, cheeks painted soft pink, and large blue eyes. Her brown hair was well combed, and she had a small red hat on her head. She was wearing a dress of the same color. She was sitting on a chair, and behind her, a luxurious miniature house was perched, its style matching hers perfectly. As that, a doll. Flora frowned deeply, somewhat impressed. Although she wasn't expecting it, her sharp eye could tell the quality just by looking at it. Her instinct told her that it was not only of the highest quality but also very, very expensive. This has to be a fucking joke. An eyebrow twitched, and Adrian could feel the familiar déjà vu touch on his shoulder. If this was who he thought it was. The scene reflected in the mirror moved away a little, showing more of the place they were looking at. It was a vast room, easily bigger than the one they were in. The room was finely decorated and orderly. Multiple tables and shelves full of more dolls with their own little houses. Some had more accessories than others, be it carriages, puppies, or a small mirror, but all were of the highest quality. It looked like the place of a collector and a very serious one at that. Not a speck of dust was to be seen, and each doll looked as if it had just come out of the package. On one of the furthest tables, there was a doll. She had black hair, but her roots were blonde. Her eyes were a soft yellow, and they were half closed. She was wearing an elegant, almost saintly black dress. Behind her, there was an elegant little house, but it was strange. Half of it was painted black and soft yellow, while the other half was painted orchid purple and vintage orange. Flora saw this and concluded that the doll must be part of a set, so one more was needed to complete the image. Ads by PubFuture. It seems that your objective has a certain taste. Not sure how to feel about such a collection, Flora could only rely on her judgment. Adrian did not reply, just pursed his lips and frowned more before she could say anything. The door to the curious collection opened and a man dressed in a dark robe entered. As soon as he entered the room, he pulled down his hood, revealing his anguished face. He looked to be about 29 years old. His hair was slicked back in a slanted style. He had deep crimson eyes and a high nose, and thin lips. He was handsome but did not look very masculine. With a pathetic cry, He ran towards the black-haired doll with blonde roots and knelt before her. He looked at her as if she were the most holy of saints and he the dirtiest of sinners. "Please forgive this infidel, Madame Grish. I won't be able to get Madame Lucy until next week." The man cried out in pure pain. "Peef, that's pathetic. What kind of person is so obsessed with dolls? Does he have no friends and takes refuge in his porcelain companions to face loneliness?" Flora burst out laughing at what she saw, tears almost falling from her gray eyes. "Yep, it's him. No one else would be so fond of dolls." Adrian stared blankly at the scene in the mirror. His face was expressionless. One of the future members of the Tarot Club, Mr. Moon, the sanguine Emlyn White. What the hell is this guy doing in Lindbergh? Shouldn't he be in Backland? Grunting, Adrian touched the middle of the mirror surface with his bloodied finger, pausing the scene. Grabbing the vial with the bloody thread along with the rest of the hair he had, he put them on the mirror's surface and drew a symbol on them that translated to mark. Having done that, he said in ancient Hermes, "Incinerate." An illusory white flame manifested at his voice, covering the hair and bloody thread with fire. They began to decompose on the face of the spiritual fire. When they turned into a blackish-green paste, the symbol he had written before appeared on the back of the paused emblem. Snap! With the click of his fingers, the scene was broken, and the mirror returned to normal. Adrian grabbed the blackish-green paste and put it in one of the empty vials. "You have a talent for mirror divination. That's rare in someone from a pathway with nothing to do with mysticism," Flora admitted, looking at what he had done. Even though she had used the cryptologist's ability to understand what he was doing, multiple details had escaped her. "I'm sure anyone who reads that book will get a special level. But it is by the blessing of my Lord that I can use it so well." The redhead closed his eyes and gave a greeting to nothingness. Flora swallowed unconsciously. "I thought the only deity with authority over the mirror world was the primordial demoness, but it turns out the Scarlet Monarch also has some authority." What kind of ancient deity had returned? Not wanting to have dangerous thoughts, the woman quickly changed the subject. "What did you even do? You said incinerate. Did you attack him?" "Even though I could have, I didn't. I just marked him. If I ever need to find him, there is no place or cave he can hide that I can't find." "Won't that guy notice anything? Aren't you worried about being discovered?" "Don't worry. This method is effective, and from what I could see of that guy, I don't think he'll find out what I did," Adrian said confidently as he put the mirror back in his tunic. He had just cast a little curse on the man, which, while not hurting him or affecting his life in any way, would allow him to find out wherever he was whenever he wanted by simply applying the paste to a mirror. The redhead wasn't worried that such a curse would be discovered and dealt with, since what he had cursed wasn't Emlyn himself but his reflection. This was one of the reasons why the witch's curses were on par with and even surpassed some devil families, the ability to curse reflections. Everything that a mirror saw would be remembered by the mirror world, never to be forgotten. Whether objects, people, or events, all would be remembered. Any sufficiently reflective surface could be considered a mirror with a connection to the mirror world. And therefore, a means to curse depending on the preparations made. Even a drop of water could be used. Still, only high-sequence witches would be capable of doing so, and even then, it would require heavy preparations and would only work as a temporary curse, lasting only as long as the drop remained in the air. All this made curses through mirrors extremely difficult to detect. A curse of illness could be placed on a person's reflection, and they could die, not knowing what had happened unless special investigations were carried out. The only way to be freed from the curse is through a ritual with a high-sequence Beyonders of the Sun pathway that cleanses the being itself, or an advanced ritual that purifies everything about oneself. For such a ritual to work, it must be aimed at the reflection. Adrian felt he could make that process even more difficult if he cursed in the City of Calamities, but that would be overkill. It wasn't necessary to do such a thing for now. Sighing a little, Adrian got up from his seat. The skin under his face twisted like worms, and Harvey Wayne's face returned after a moment. "Let's go home." He had to do some thinking. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. Returning to the room he had rented in the Elysian district, and after changing into more colorful clothes, he took a rented carriage that dropped him a few streets away from home. He completed the short journey on foot. Entering his unit and locking the door, Klein stood with his hand on the key for a few seconds. Exhaling an exaggeratedly long sigh, the clown staggered back and ran a hand across his face. Luckily my theory was correct. Chariot is the kind of person who, while he enjoys teasing people, enjoys being teased back even more. It's like those friends you pass in the street, and out of the blue, they punch you on the arm. Instead of getting angry and causing friction, you have to hit back with twice the force. That's their way of showing affection. Klein felt he had been able to see a part of the real Chariot. After summoning up a little courage, he approached the turbulent river that was the man and put his feet in the water. He realized that instead of being inhumanly cold, it was quite warm. But he also felt that he still had a lot to see. Although he had barely touched the edge of the river, he still had to explore its dark and turbulent depths. This conclusion was not arrived through spirituality and his experience in this new world. No, if it were so, he would have thought Chariot was a bully who liked to crush people to feel superior. This conclusion came from his most valuable place, his soul, his home. He felt how it resonated with the man's actions, a bell looking for its other half to jingle alongside it. Sighing again, Klein sat up straight. Discovering how to truly deal with Chariot had given him a new insight into how passive he had been. How can I look a fellow transmigrator in the eye if I keep letting myself be trampled on? I have to have my own spines too. The road home will be full of disasters and dangers. If Chariot's mere games almost made him lose his mind, how was he supposed to face all those challenges? Maybe that's what he wanted to achieve. That I'd show more courage and stop shrinking just because I was up against someone stronger. Frowning, Klein didn't know what to think. While he could already understand the man's communication style, that didn't mean he understood what was going on in his head. Knowing that he was wasting his time now, Klein put those thoughts aside and went to the bathroom. From what he had seen, Chariot had managed to obtain the weapon that Sun had requested, so it was very likely that he would soon receive the order to deliver it. Therefore, his promotion would have to wait a little longer. Almost an hour later, some familiar murmurs reached his ears and Klein quickly climbed into the mysterious space. The solitary stained crimson flame pulsed and he extended his spirituality to it. Without raising his head, he heard what he had expected. "Mr. Fool, I have the commission for Little Sun ready. I need your confirmation to send it." Klein made a small edit, eliminating the demonic figure and replacing it with a kneeling red-haired man. Then, Klein sent the edited video to the Crimson Star representing Mr. Sun. Inside the City of Silver. Derek Berg's house. On hearing and seeing the information provided by Mr. Fool, Derek was ecstatic, immediately controlling his state and quickly sending a reply. There were still a few days left before his expedition, and he wanted to use that time to practice with Mr. Chariot's weapon, so he didn't leave the house much. Preparing the altar according to the specifications given by the Fool and praying, the young man watched in amazement as an illusory door of light formed on the altar. Inside the door of light, a world of gray fog stretched out to infinity. At the top of the world were several colored lights, and above them, a grandiose palace rose. At the head of the table, seated in the chair of honor, the mysterious figure of the Fool looked down calmly. Unconsciously, Derek bowed his head in respect to the god and closed his eyes. When he opened his eyes again, the door was gone. Excited, the young man looked down and saw where his weapon would be. On top of the reception altar was a metal staff, longer than his arm and a little thicker than his broomstick. His mouth opened and closed in disbelief. Was this the weapon with the destructive power he had asked for? In the midst of his confusion, he noticed a folded letter next to the staff. Taking it, Derek couldn't help but praise the neatness and beauty of the handwriting. Less than greater than. Hello little son, I hope you like my gift. Don't let its appearance fool you. That simple staff there is quite special. It has 2 powers in total. First, it will increase your physical attributes beyond any sequence 7 once it is active. The second is that you will become a master of weapons, specifically 5. It would be as if you had trained with them all your life. It only has one negative side, although considering where you are, it shouldn't be a big problem. Of course, unless you are antisocial. But considering how cute you are, I doubt that is the case. This staff loves combat. It will become anxious if it doesn't participate in combat or high-intensity training. If it doesn't fight or train for 3 days, the person carrying the artifact will experience a deep depression. Enjoy its sun face. Love, the chariot. P.S. To activate it you have to turn the handle. Have fun. Less than greater than. Looking at the little drawing of a smiling yellow face, Derek could feel his cheeks grow a little warm with embarrassment. He was an only child. His parents had no other children, and their own families had died long ago. So he was alone. Now alone in a big house, he often wondered what it would have been like if there had been someone else who shared his blood. How Chariot treated him reminded him a lot of how he saw some siblings interact. Is this what it feels like to have an older brother? As a nice feeling. After looking at the metal tube on the altar and rereading the last part of the letter, Derek reached down and curiously picked up the staff. He noticed how it was heavier than it looked. With a twist of his hands, a loud click was heard. Immediately, the handle lengthened and expanded, and in an instant, Derek now held a sword over a meter long in his hands. A transformable weapon. Excited, the young boy turned the handle of the sword again until another click sounded. Ah, pum. The increased weight of the sword almost made it fall from his hands, and Derek watched open-mouthed as the sword became a broadsword. Although the weight seemed too much a moment ago, now he could barely feel it. He made an experimental swing, and the power he felt from the attack made his heart pound. With his eyes shining like little suns, he turned the handle again, anxious to test what other weapons it could be transformed into. Click, 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 ... Lindbergh, Ashera, Astoke Quarter. Adrian had already announced some time ago in his company that there would be no work today because their great effort deserved a rest. Nobody would question the opportunity of a long weekend, let alone ask the boss in depth why. Flora simply returned to her room while he prepared a good lunch. It was 3 p.m., and they still hadn't eaten anything, so the man made sure to put extra meat on the table. After that, and discussing that they would go out again at 6 p.m. for a performance at the theater, Adrian went to his room, and after notifying the fool, he sacrificed the weapon he had obtained from the gathering. With all that done, the dark-haired man finally felt he could go to his corner to think. So, lying down on his bed to take a nap, Adrian closed his eyes and began to draw the sphere of light. Outside the city of calamities, sitting on his white beach chair, the redhead had his cheek resting on his right knuckles while his left hand was tapping the card of blasphemy on his lap. The events of the mirror divination repeated themselves several times in his mind. Apparently, part of my theory is correct. Some points and facts cannot be changed no matter what. He believed he could change history by attempting to save the Nighthawks from the script the useless writer had thrust upon them. But no matter what, the captain died along with Klein. Although the latter had said nothing about anyone else dying, Adrian would assume that they were alive. The reason why they lived while Captain Dunn Smith and Klein Moretti didn't was not simple. Adrian wasn't even sure why, but he had a theory. In this world, there are unchangeable points. Marvel's what if explained it decently, so he felt it was a good example. There are some facts that no matter how hard you try, you can never change them. They are events already defined by destiny. While some would think it was stupid and that destiny was not written, Adrian had only one thing to say to them. The existence of his world. That of his life as Joe and Nahuel. In a way, the destiny of this world had already been written. And Joa had read it all, the beginning and the end. It was this knowledge that kept him alive now in his new life as Adrian, as well as dooming him. Ads by PubFuture. He was a dead man walking, his heart and being only continuing to exist thanks to Hunter's Hallow, which held his fragmented and ruined soul together as well as hiding it from the world. That Emlyn White is part of the Tarot Club has already been written, and that will not change. This is what fate dictates. After a few seconds, Adrian spat to one side. How fucking disgusting. Of course, this was only for the original story's most important points. The story of the book no longer existed. All that remained were dying fragments that resonated in the river of destiny. Although disgusted by the thought of predestined destiny, Adrian wondered if the book's disappearance was a good thing. The existence of the moonless night was a horrible omen for what might come. Hee. Laughing pathetically, she looked up and watched the city and the smoke in the distance. This is the burden I must bear, isn't it? Shaking his head, the subject was abandoned. Thinking and talking about the book was immensely dangerous. So much so that Adrian had locked away the author's name deep in his brain. Like a true conspirator, His enhanced thinking allowed him to put specific data deep in his brain. Of course, this wasn't hypnosis, so he couldn't forget it. All he could do to keep that information out of his mind constantly was do it consciously. It was somewhat exhausting, but nothing he couldn't handle. He was used to it. That aside, the information that Emlyn White was in Ashera had him quite unsettled, but it wasn't very surprising. Adrian could even see an opportunity in this. An opportunity to obtain information. The Sanguine are one of the oldest races on the planet. They are similar to the almost completely extinct Phoenix, but unlike them, this race still has a large number of members. From what I know, the Sanguine have members who have lived since the Second Epoch. The redhead's eyes sparkled. If there was anyone who could tell him about the Angel of Silver, it was them. Of course, aside from the gods themselves. But it's not like he can ask them. But the problem would be getting a meeting with those old Sanguines. Being such long-standing members, their condition was not the best. To continue living, they had to sleep in coffins and should only be awakened for critical events or some divine revelation. In addition to that, these members were of a very high rank in the Sanguine. Obtaining a meeting with such an ancient being to obtain information would not be easy. Patting the card of blasphemy on his lap a few times, Adrian raised his head and, opening his right hand, saw the vial with the blackish-green paste. Grinning sharply, he shook the vial. Lucky for me, I have the savior of the Sanguine to help me. Isn't that right, Mr. Moon? No doubt about it, there was no rest for the wicked. He then looked past the paste at the general area where he kept his ingredients for the Reaper potion. Now, the only thing he was missing was the ritual. Plan and execute a successful capture of a target with a sequence higher than your own. Flaunt the completed conspiracy before them and consume the potion as they witness your victory, filled with fear and despair. Repeating the ritual for his promotion, the redhead could feel the corners of his lips rise slightly. One objective came to mind almost instantly. With the opportunity for promotion added to eliminating my biggest competitor, it would be stupid not to want to use it for my ritual. Adrian was considering hunting the traitorous archbishop in Zangwil. Although he is Klein's prey, he also has my prey, so I also have the right to hunt him. After a moment's consideration, the redhead could only sigh and shake his head. No matter how tempting it was, that prey belonged to the detective. But whoever your ally is, she is not. Laughing softly, the redhead winked a mischievous eye. It was impossible that the useless writer was acting alone. Adrian not only believed this but was almost certain of who it was. The demoness sect. Ademisal said he saw witches who were going to kill him, so he went to find me to protect him. If that isn't a revelation, nothing is. He would confirm this tomorrow when he gave the potion to the boy, but it would only be a confirmation, it wouldn't change his plans. On October 14th, he planned to use one of Ashera's most important celebrations to expose the useless writer and the witches who might be in Lindbergh. The Day of Knowledge, the day that was thought to be the birthday of the god of knowledge and wisdom. What he wanted the least of all was to alert 008 that he was on them, so he would use the excuse of participating that day to report to the Holy Temple of Knowledge. Harvey Wayne's actions would not look strange, he would be another believer who went to pray. A reasonable development, one may say. Although Adrian was sure Hunter's Hallow was hiding him from 008, but acting directly against the pen would undoubtedly alert it. Every measure to avoid detection had to be used, halves could do nothing. A few hours after his Tarot Express, Klein decided to start preparing everything for his promotion. Leaving the containers with the ingredients in his bathroom, he left the room but soon returned, this time with a very well-cleaned pot. Placing the pot on the sink, Klein took all the materials for a sacrificial ritual from the cabinet, ready to take out the rest of the ingredients he had already obtained from the space on the gray fog. The spring of the elves' brown crystal was bought at the party a few hours ago, while the rest of the secondary ingredients were purchased in various shops in the district a few days ago, just after he finished the chariot research mission. In total, he had spent 150 sasam on supplementary ingredients. Looking at the ingredients for his potion in front of him, Klein breathed slowly and calmed his heart. He was now about to enter the tree's hold of the Beander of middle sequence of the modern era. He would say goodbye to only being slightly stronger than a normal person in certain aspects. Finally getting Beander powers. With all that in mind and with a calmer heart, Klein began to prepare the potion for his promotion, following the steps of first the secondary ingredients before placing the main ingredients. With the clown's ability to control his body, the initial preparations were completed and the main ingredients, the spinal fluid of the dark-parted black panther and the mist tree ant true root, were placed one by one. Plop. After placing the last ingredient, a pale mist suddenly rose from the pot but was pulled back by an invisible force. With everything calm, the clown took a copper coin from his pocket and placed it between his fingers, turning it. Catching it in the palm of his hand, he watched as it came up heads, indicating a positive result. Without further hesitation, the clown put the coin back in his pocket and poured all the potion into a transparent bottle he had prepared. The liquid was rather unique. It was as if fireworks were constantly being released from within it. Red, orange, yellow, green, and other colors scattered continuously, disappeared, and reappeared like fireworks in the night sky. This was the magician's potion. Sighing slightly, the clown did not rush to drink the potion. Instead, sitting on the toilet, he closed his eyes and used cogitation to rid himself of his emotions and thoughts for a moment. As soon as his mind was free, the clown threw his head back as he brought the potion to his lips, and with deep swallows he drank it down. As the potion passed down his throat, it felt as if countless bubbles were exploding. Klein's entire body felt like this, and massive amounts of information flooded his mind, exploding in fireworks. Hornassus. Phlegre. Hornassus. The veins on the man's forehead swelled and it felt as if his head would explode. However, this situation was not new to Klein. The ravings he heard every time he climbed into the mysterious space above the gray fog and the cries of the true creator's baby were much more terrifying. Hornassus. Phlegre. See. Mourn. The tempting murmurs came, changing slowly but unnaturally, like misinterpreted recordings. Circa. Mourn. Bloss. Blasf. Bloss. Klein managed to regain his thoughts, and began to draw the sphere of light in his mind to restrict them. Blasf. Blaspheme. Blasphemous. The sudden high-pitched scream that assaulted his mind drew a groan from Klein, whose state of cogitation was broken the instant he began to scream in pain. Ahhhrgg. All the murmurs condensed into a single cacophony of voices, shouting and howling, the voices not at all like the ones he was used to hearing, but seeming to come from a very, very distant and strange place. Blasphemous. 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 The man's head swelled and contracted, multiple veins appearing on his forehead writhing like worms. Klein gritted his teeth and tried to restrict his thoughts again, but they escaped him more and more. The man could feel his sanity slipping away, but using all his willpower, he pulled himself together and clung to his thoughts, tying them up with string and not letting them go for anything. Regaining control over his mind, Klein focused on drawing the sphere of light and entering cogitation. The swelling and contraction of his head stopped after an unknown time, but he did not stop. He continued to draw the sphere of light until all the abnormalities he felt in his body stopped and the murmurs disappeared. After an unknown time, Klein opened his eyes and took long gasps of air, thick layers of sweat covering his body. Feeling his vision blur, Klein tried to hold on to the sink but his hand failed and the man fell to the floor with a loud thud. The last thing Klein saw before everything went black was, from the corner of his bathroom, a pair of cold, translucent, merciless eyes fading away like smoke. Everything in his vision was blurred, but after a second, the detective blinked and his vision cleared. Groaning in pain, the man clutched his head in near agony. He could feel his brain wanting to explode. Those eyes did something. Clenching his teeth, Klein remembered those eyes as if it were yesterday. They were the same ones he had seen behind old Neil when he advanced to see her. The hidden sage. Is this what it feels like to have information forced into your brain? No wonder they took old Neil away for treatment. Enduring this continuously would undoubtedly drive you mad and cause you to lose control. Gasping pathetically, Klein did not move a muscle. He was sure that the slightest movement would only make his condition worse. The respect he felt for his teacher had increased enormously. One word and I almost lost control. Is this the danger of gods losing their minds? Klein was sure that what he heard was merely a distant echo. If it had really been an injection of information, he would undoubtedly have lost control. The word that almost killed him was repeated over and over in his mind, even though he was no longer receiving information. Due to the horrible method, it left a painful and tortuous echo. Blasphemous. 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 Klein did not know who or what he was addressing, nor why the hidden sage was shouting that word with such hatred. But he would not divulge or explore. Not only did his condition prevent it, but it would be suicide to do so. After an unknown time, Klein managed to regain control of his mind and the great pain he felt in his head subsided. Without pain, information began to come to him, but this time he could understand it. Blinking, disoriented, his vision clear but empty in the face of change. He saw himself walking with Captain Dunn and Sleepless Royale Riding, walking along a strange path that he recognized as old Neil's bungalow. What's going on? I don't remember this. Confused and feeling that he could do nothing but observe, Klein did just that. He observed. The scene changed and now they were in front of the place. Klein saw himself grabbing the rope and pulling it, ringing the bell inside the house. After a few seconds of silence and no response, Klein watched confusedly what was happening. Confusion turned to panic as he saw dark red blood begin to flow like a gloomy river through the gaps in the door. Before he could react, the door opened with a horrible screech. The carpet of the room was red and sticky, covered in blood and hair. Looking up dazedly, Klein saw how the walls, the living room's floor, ceiling, round table, piano, and chairs were all covered in the same disgusting, sticky and hairy liquid. Old Neil's head hung in the air, connected to the ceiling by a thick liquid. His forehead and cheeks each had a pair of eyes. They were cold and ruthless eyes with no eyelashes. Old Neil lost control. That's impossible. The red gloves discovered his abnormality and took him away for treatment. He's alive and well. Klein's mouth opened and closed in horror. What did this mean? Just when he felt he was about to lose his mind, Klein watched in a daze as Dunn raised his revolver and pointed it at the floating head. Bang, bang, crack. With 2 shots and the scene shattering into countless pieces of glass like old Neil's head, Klein didn't even have time to scream. Before he knew it, the glass had grown back together and no longer showed old Neil bungalow. Now he could see a woman's room. A bed with elegant and sensual sheets was in the middle of the room while in a corner, he saw a chair and next to it a full-length mirror that only reflected pure darkness. In that room, Klein managed to see 3 people, a man wearing a black suit, black hair, brown eyes, an average-looking face. Another man was standing next to him. He wasn't very tall. His brown hair was somewhat thick and his body was always average. In his hands he was carrying what appeared to be a mirror covered by a black cloth. Klein recognized himself just as quickly as he recognized Kenley. In front of them, he could see what appeared to be a woman, but her features were. Did she have features? His mind danced between illusion and confusion, closing his eyes to recover, to breathe, and after a moment he opened them again, but he didn't look at the woman's face, only at her feet. The scene had accelerated. This time he watched as Kenley knelt, vomiting yellow bile, then a red heart, lungs and stomach. What he was seeing suddenly jammed and repeated for a moment before jamming again, the movement very much like a damaged video. The sound of a broken record from a megaphone resonated and finally the scene stabilized, but now it was different. The woman's room was empty, there was no one there. The full-length mirror now reflected the old Neil bungalow in its reflection, but this time there was no crimson river under its door. The same static sound filled his ears and before Klein could do anything, the feeling of waking up overwhelmed him and the scene in front of him shattered like glass. Gasp! Sitting up suddenly, Klein looked around him in terror, ready to see another nightmarish scene unfold, but all he saw was his familiar bathroom. Blinking dazedly, the detective touched his forehead in shock, but a sharp pain brought him out of his trance. Lowering his hand, he saw it covered in a crimson liquid. Getting up, Klein looked at himself in the mirror and saw a small cut on his forehead. Blood stained part of his robe and marked his face down the middle. Frowning and blinking a little, Klein raised his right hand and placed it on his wound. When he removed it, the cut had disappeared, but his forearm had started to bleed a little. This was one of the abilities he obtained after being promoted to magician, damage transfer. As long as the wound was not fatal and he could move his arms, he was able to transfer injuries to different parts of the body, turning fatal wounds into minor injuries. With his wound treated, Klein turned on the tap of his sink and began to wipe the blood from his face. Turning off the tap, he looked up and saw his reflection. His eyes looked tired and a whirlpool seemed to be moving in them. After a few seconds of staring at his reflection without blinking, he muttered, "What the hell was that?" From what the red gloves had told him once they had extracted old Neil, the hidden sage shared information from time to time and the old man was beginning to listen to it. But that was only supposed to happen with the Beyonders of the Mystery Prior pathway. Not the Seer pathway. Besides, what kind of information was that? Klein knew that those visions were not real, that the reality was something else. That old Neil was being treated in the barracks of the Church of Evernight Goddess and that he never lost control. That Kensley is probably with her fiancé now, finishing the preparations for their wedding. Klein knew that that was the truth, reality. But those visions also felt like reality. A nightmare come true. He wasn't sure how to take this. After all, this was information revealed by an evil god who was mad. The information given by him should not be taken as truth. Ads by PubFuture. Using a towel, Klein dried his face of the excess water. Watching as drops fell from his wet hair, and after thinking about the information for a moment, a dark thought struck his mind. Maybe, is that what would have happened if Chariot hadn't intervened? That didn't make any sense. Why would the hidden sage show him that? What was he supposed to achieve with it? Shaking his head and quickly drawing the multiple overlapping spheres of light, Klein took charge of his thoughts. This couldn't be something he thought here. Quickly taking the 4 steps against the clock, he climbed into the mysterious space above the gray fog. Immediately, he could feel how his connection to this space had intensified. And how he now had more control over it. But Klein wasn't interested in that right now. Using his newfound control over the gray fog, he bathed his entire body in it. He did this multiple times, only stopping when he was sure he was clean. Taking his place in the seat of honor, he finally allowed himself to think about what had happened. Why had the hidden sage shown him that? No matter how he thought about it or what excuse he could come up with, it didn't make sense that this deity would pay attention to such an event. But Klein didn't let that make him dismiss the information. Feeling he was getting nowhere, he reviewed what he knew about the hidden sage. Maybe that way he would find a clue. He was an abstract imaginary concept used by the Moses ascetic order to refer to the source of collective knowledge, until he one day came into being and transformed into an unknown hidden existence. He murmurs knowledge from time to time in the worst possible way. Source of collective knowledge. Klein frowned slightly. Was it possible that the change in what was supposed to happen caught his attention a little and therefore he took a look at one of the participants? That glance resulting in the mental assault he received. Not feeling like he was getting anywhere and that he may be wrong, Klein could only shake his head. He lacked too much information to develop a correct conjecture, but this issue could not be abandoned. Since he was already here, he looked at the bronze table in front of him calmly. Reaching out to the air, he took out his bathroom mirror from the gray fog. Controlling the mirror, he made it reflect him. Looking at his reflection, he controlled the power of the mysterious space and separated his reflection from the mirror. Immediately freed from his prison, his reflection began to show changes, his eyes darkened. And he began to give off a gloomy and crazy aura. This dark Klein trembled for a moment more. Klein only used his control over the mysterious space to suppress the effects of the separation. After about 2 seconds, the other Klein's eyes lost their light and became empty, but the dark and crazy aura remained. Lowering his hand, Klein in the seat of honor pressed his cheek against his knuckles and willed the other Klein to move to the back of the table, to the last seat that looked directly at him. When the other Klein sat down, a thick layer of gray fog covered his figure and made him illusory, just like the other members. With a thought, the other Klein raised an arm and waved, the movement natural and almost not costing him spirituality. It worked. I knew that with a little more control over this space it would be possible. Using my reflection as a Smurf account, I'm a genius. Not only had his theory worked, but the spirituality that this consumed was very little, he hardly even noticed it. The Smurf account had been created. The only bad thing was that the dark and crazy aura couldn't be changed easily, but Klein decided to keep it after a few attempts. Every blessed of a god is peculiar. How could my blessed not be? Satisfied with that reasoning, he put his hand down. Happy and trying to forget the previous event, Fool Klein smiled at the last chair, hello. Closing his mouth, he took 2 seconds but soon the other Klein also shouted, hello. This is like talking into a microphone through my mind, I just have to think it and wish it and my reflection will do it. Smiling victoriously, he gave a quiet nod to the last chair. The Fool said calmly, welcome new member, which tarot card would you like to draw? The other raised his hand and scratched his chin, laughing hoarsely, world. I choose the world card. Dash 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 dash. Okay, I think everything is ready. First, fuck my job. With that said, the daily chapters are back. They will be published around this time. Oh, and I haven't forgotten what I said. For my faithful readers, here is what I wanted to give you, check the comment. I have to see how to send it, but I'll see about that when the winner is decided. Next Saturday I'll do the give out. In the coming days I'll post how it will work. Beautiful kisses and good luck to everyone that will participate. Oh, I'll also soon publish Flora's design.